Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, brought to you by Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, as always, your humble narrator, Chris Howard from Lace Partners. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Today's podcast is a lace-only affair. And the reason it's a lace-only affair is because we have recently produced quite an interesting bit of thought leadership that we wanted to share with you guys, you wonderful listeners that we have. So to do that, I am going to get two of our experienced lacers on the podcast today to talk a little bit about it. Now, the white paper itself is called Less Stress HRIS. It is all around getting yourself ready. It's part of a series that we're going to be running. And it's all about getting yourself ready, taking that journey on the road to the cloud. And to do that, I'm going to start with ladies first. I have the fabulous Sian Beacham. How are you doing, Sian?
I am good, thank you, Chris. It's Friday afternoon. What can ever not be good about a Friday afternoon?
Yes, indeedy. The weather is just about picked up. Of course, by the time people are listening to this, it'll be Thursday, but let's not date the podcast or anything. Sian is, ladies and gentlemen, making her debut, and she has clearly shown that in the first instance. So, Sian, thank you very much for joining us. And we've also got Aaron Alburey back after a long hiatus. Nice to have you back, Aaron. Didn't think I'd ever get you on because you buried yourself in client work and didn't want to come and play with me on the HR on the Offensive podcast. So it's good to have you back.
It's nice to be back, Chris. And you know what? I thought you just didn't want me anymore. So it's great to hear. I'm back. Love it.
Now, Nothing could be further from the truth. Now, we are going to talk. I wanted to get you guys on because obviously you both have an in-depth knowledge of cloud HR technology and those sort of elements. And we wanted to talk about the white paper, which Sian has had intimate knowledge on. And Aaron just loves a bit of HR tech. So we couldn't keep him away, could we, Sian?
We couldn't.
Even if we wanted to. So we're going to talk about the paper itself. We're going to go down. We're not going to give away all of the golden nuggets, but we're just going to talk about the 5 steps of the paper. But as is tradition for this podcast, we have to kick off with a fundamentally different question. So my question, I'm going to start with Sian and then go to Aaron on before we get into the nubbing of the Less Stress HRIS paper, is that I've been reading today about a Great Dane named after Macaulay Culkin's character from Home Alone has been crowned the world's tallest dog by Guinness Book of Records. And it got me thinking, what's the largest animal or even smallest animal if you wanted to shrink down an animal or if you wanted to enlarge an animal, like this Great Dane as an example? Sian, what would be the thing that you would like either reduced, an animal that you'd like reduced in size or an animal that you'd like enlarged in size? And I'll give you a few seconds to think about it by giving an option that my wife would choose. She's always wanted a micro elephant. She loves elephants. So she would love a little micro elephant, almost the size of a cat, that could just sort of trumpet its way around the house. Now, I'm quite happy to just have our cat, and hopefully they don't invent micro elephants. But Sian, what would you go for?
I think, given my diminutive stature and the heightism that there is in lace, I would go for growing Sian, so that I am at last over 5 foot tall and towering above you all. I think that's where I'd act on the elder growth factor. Tall Sian. Let's go for that.
I quite like that, a formidable character that you would be if you were a 7 foot tall Sian Beacham. Aaron, what would be your selection choice?
I'm still trying to get my head around your good partner trying to litter train a micro elephant. I think that'd be quite interesting to see. Yeah. But I had 2 things went through my head. The first, I think I'd like a giant seahorse. And then I'd like a swimming pool to put the giant seahorse in, and I could just ride it around. It'd be really quite cool. So that was one idea. And then completely non-animal-like, I'd just like to take Jupiter and shrink it to kind of cricket ball size, and then just have it in my room. You know what I mean? So yeah. I'm sure the scientists that are listening in will tell me that that's just probably destroyed the Earth or something. But there you go. Micro Jupiter, giant seals.
A micro Jupiter for our co-founder, who clearly has some kind of a god complex. Now let's move on to the less stress HRIS paper. Sian, I'm going to kick this off with you, because obviously you've been an integral part of helping us to build out this quite fabulous paper, actually, having reread it again this morning. Can you just give our listeners, let's just sort of do a bit of a framing exercise. Can you talk a little bit about why we decided to create this white paper in the first place?
Yes. If we look back, what we did last year was we really focused on buyer's remorse and thinking about why people weren't happy with their technology. And then from there, we started to think, hang on, why is it that truly people are getting frustrated with technology? When, if we step back from this, it's very rarely the technology's fault. So it's really about framing, how do you do this and actually do it properly? So really stepping back and thinking about, what do you do to prepare? What do you do around thinking about the depth of understanding and detail you need to get into before you make your decisions? And then thinking about, how do you actually track and maximize the return of investment from that technology, maximize the adoption, and really just thinking about all of that future proofing that you need to do, but doing it in logical, clear steps so that we're really helping people understand. We're sharing all the pain and the scars that we've got, so that we're really helping people just step by step through what is a relatively simple journey. If you know and you understand some of the pitfalls, you can actually mitigate risk right up front. So it's all about this one in particular. This white paper is about the preparation and how you pave the way on that road to the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And we're going to go into each of those 5 steps. I'm going to stick with you, Sian, because I'm going to get Aaron to go through, get his thoughts on step 1 first. But of course, as you mentioned, this was part 1, which is kind of like the prepare part. And just as a little bit of a teaser for those people listening in, can we just talk about what we're going to do for part 2, which admittedly we haven't created yet, but we're in the process of creating.
It's in the brains. So what this one is doing is, as we said, that road to the cloud. Then what we're thinking is, look, actually, as you actually get to the bottom of the mountain, let's just think about what you really need to do from an implementation perspective. So we know and understand that, again, even as you're starting work with your vendor, with your SI, as you're actually trying to land this technology in the broader organization, on that implementation journey, there are pitfalls. And what we're going to focus on next is, what are those pitfalls and how do we mitigate the risk of those, so that once you actually get to the top of the mountain, we are then above the clouds and into the third stage here, which is we're looking over those clouds and we're saying, right, okay, oh, rainbow, I need to optimize. So we're really then into that third stage, and that third white paper will be about, okay, we might have done a good job of actually implementing on that journey, but actually there's always challenges that come at us from all sorts of directions, and there's always ways you can optimize. So that third one will be about the optimization part of the journey.
Absolutely love it. And I think we've already nailed the visual identity there when you talked about rainbows. So there we go. Helping my creative services team do it for them. But Aaron, let's talk specifically. Let's go through the step by step. So I'll start you off with step 1, and then Sian, if you've got anything to add and build Aaron's bit. Well, we talk about in step 1, building the value case. So could you just set the scene as to what are we talking about there when we're talking about the need to build a value case? And let's talk specifically about, from a LACE perspective, when we advise our customers, like, what are the sort of things that we talk to them about?
And we deliberately choose the words, Chris, value case. I think that's probably one thing to reflect on, right? We talk about a value case, and the reason for that is that it's not just about the costs. I mean, clearly they're a big building block. But I think, when we're looking at a value case, you really, right at the start, trying to maybe justify to the board, maybe get your exec on aligned, to say, why should we do this? What's the rationale for it? What are we trying to achieve? Sometimes that's simply, we don't have anything, right? And we need something. We're running it on spreadsheets. Help us out. Other times, there are some major business changes that are happening. Maybe it's an expansion. Maybe it's an M&A that's driven this discussion. Maybe it's new skills that are required to have competitive advantage. So it's those sorts of things that you want to pick up. So the value case stages really are about hooking to that business outcome, what do you really need? What's the context to why we're doing this? And we'd always try and push people to go a little bit further than just because we haven't got anything. What is it you can achieve as an outcome? Really understand some of the big sort of things that ring fence that value case. So scope, timings, other projects that are happening, all that sort of stuff. Really get into the value opportunities that you're trying to deliver. Maybe it's about optimizing your operating model. It's about productivity. Maybe it's about employee experience. Figure that out. Think about the options that you have. There's always options in a value case. How fast you do it, what sequence you do it in, who you do it with. Do you start with a minimum viable solution? Build that out. So get those in place and start to build up those costs, build up those benefits, build out the options and the sequencing. Really sort of work through who you're going to engage and who you need to get on side. Quite often we find that buyer's remorse that Sian was talking about, sometimes that can start as early as this because you haven't engaged the right stakeholders and you haven't engaged them in the right dialogue and discussion. So that's really quite a key part to this. Why are we doing it and who and how and whatever. And then sort of formalizing that case, working with finance, really sort of understanding, what's the investment, what's the return on investment going to be, what's the net present value, the NPV going to be, how are you going to map out the success of this program and what are the formal metrics for it. So quite a lot to cover in that space, but really the exciting part, I think, is that first part where you're really starting out with why are we doing this and really getting to the heart of the value you're going to add to the business.
Perfect. And Sian, from your side, I guess I'll give you a bit of a free swim here. Is there any other bits that you'd add on there? Any if I'm somebody listening into this and I'm thinking, okay, so I need to build out my value case, where do I start? Or what sort of challenge questions should I have? Or anything that you want to add on to what Aaron's just talked about there?
Yeah, I think my free swim pass would go to two things. It would be, when we're looking at the investment needed, it's really getting into the nitty gritty of all of the cost. What we see a lot of clients do is, of course, clients will look at the license provisioning needed and, of course, the SI cost. But what they forget is that client-side resources are needed, a lot of them full time. So thinking about what capability they need to build and want to build as part of this, as well as what resources they need from their expertise and their knowledge of the current incumbent systems, processes, operating model. So all of that, you've got to look at the costs of that as part of the investment case. So we would say from an investment case, you need a good T. You've got to have a good broad view of all the value that you're going to actually be delivering. And that goes from the cost saving, typical risk mitigation type, all the way through to, as Aaron said, what are you trying to achieve? What's the productivity benefit, the workforce productivity benefit that you can experience right across that top of the T? But then the depth of the cost base is really, really important, because if you don't know what this is truly going to cost, you're never going to deliver an ROI. It's not even worth tracking it. So that would be number one. And then my second free swim pass would go on change, of course. So my second free swim pass would be about what we do in a LACE value case. Is we very much focus on, yes, okay, what is it that we're doing? But why is the change needed is the fundamental. Why is it needed? What's the roadmap to the future? How are we going to get there? And how are we going to make the change happen? And as part of that, you need a decent change narrative that you're using to sell the case to the stakeholders that Aaron mentioned. So there's my two free swim passes.
I'm going to stick with you there, Sian, on the second bit. So I have built out my value case and I've started to get the buy-in and, okay, right, we know we need this and we've done our thinking. So we talk about step two being building the plan and the foundations and getting those design foundations in place. So could you give us a little bit of an overview? And then, Aaron, I'll go straight to you just for any build that you want to do.
Let's think about these two things. If we're building a house, we need a plan and we need some foundations, don't we? So it's the same here. So from a plan perspective, we need to think about the what. I know this sounds really simple, but it's really interesting how many clients don't actually really step back from, this is why I'm doing this, to, right, okay, what is the scope? What are we actually doing this for? And then when are you going to do it? So the real basics of what's the scope? When are we going to do this? again, as Aaron mentioned, that minimum viable solution mindset might be prevalent to begin with. Let's get something over the line, but you've still got to have a view for your longer term business case. How is it that you're going to add additional pieces? So talent acquisition might be a particular business challenge. So it might be important to follow your basics with a recruitment model. It might be that you've got employee experience challenges. So the self-service capability might be very quick to follow from a broader perspective, or it might already be in your core. So thinking about what the drivers are and what the core scope is and what the plan is, then the when, and then the how is where it really gets interesting, because what we do at LACE is we frame all of those how pieces into a set of key design decisions. These are decisions that you make up front, ideally before you're even thinking about which vendor, because actually they're going to influence how you set out your RFP and how you actually then, from your RFP for the vendor, start to select your SI. So it also, as you're starting to actually make these key design decisions, it starts the flexing of the muscles, the decision-making muscles, which isn't always something that, if you're not in transformation mode, you're doing. And the sorts of key design decisions that you might be making are, look, what is the employee experience ambition? What are the approaches to governance and decision-making? Some of the sort of more obvious ones, but equally there's some less obvious ones that we always say that you need to think about. So optimizing your operating model is a real opportunity as you're putting in technology. Some would say you absolutely have to anyway. So why not take that opportunity to sit back and think about what are you doing with the broader operating model? You need to think about your data strategy. You need to think about what are you doing from an organization hierarchy, job architecture. You've got to think about how are you going to enable single sign-on from a technical domain. There's so many key design decisions that you need to get done. So we say plan, and some of those key design decisions are right to actually think about right up front before you get going with selecting your vendor and your SI.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I love the analogy there of flexing the muscles as well. I think that's a really, really important thing to call out, because it's quite easy to think we want some sort of fantastic whizzy new tech, but do the thinking beforehand. It's almost better to not that my mum would love this. My mum was a maths teacher. I'll invoke my mum's approach, which was always show your workings, do your thinking, do everything first before you write anything down. And that's what we're talking about here. Yeah. Isn't it, Aaron? Any kind of builds on what Sian was just talking there before we move on to step 3?
Just a couple, and I think it's just to build a little bit on that muscle element. I think there's just, again, I think we've learned over the years, right, Sian, you have to be pragmatic with this part of the phase. And there is so much that you can be doing and so many of those elements that you talked about, but quite a lot of them would take quite a significant time in most businesses. So if you think job architecture, you mentioned there. So what can you practically do that gets you far enough and moves you along? And policies is another one that always comes up, right? People are like, I'll rationalize all my policies to make them all the same and simple. It's never that easy, right? Unions, negotiations, employee works councils. So you've got to be pragmatic. But there are also, I think, as part of that planning, there are also, and I think we again, with our years of experience have taught us, there are things that are no regrets and you need to start early in that sequence. And you touched on one of them there, Sian. Data comes up time and time again, right? No matter what you're going to put live, you've got to get your data right, especially if you can do AI these days or chatbots or anything along those lines in your solution at some point. You've got to get on top of your data, and you've got to get on top of it from the quality of it, but also the ongoing maintenance of the resources and some of those things that Sian talked about making sure you've got the right people allocated into the costs and those sorts of things all comes into that mix. So pragmatism and get started early, that'll be the two other bits.
Lovely. Absolutely love it. Right. So we've done our thinking. Value case sorted. We've started to put out the plan, and now we get to the exciting, sexy stuff. Well, I think it's exciting, sexy stuff. Aaron, I'm going to start with you and then get the part in which you're actually getting to the decision making. I need to select what tech partner I'm using. So I'll start with you, Aaron, and then I'll get Sian to just build on any additional thoughts that she's got. What are we talking about here in terms of some of the things that you need to think about when you're selecting your actual partner? And you're not allowed to say, come talk to LACE.
No, you're right. I think, don't mention LACE, but that said, being independent, we do have a perspective on this, right? And I think that's one of the things that comes to it, Chris. So I've got to mention it. Things to think about on this. And I think one of the things is just to reflect on the evolution of the technology vendors in the last few years. They are getting much, much closer together now in terms of functionality that they offer, especially if for the kind of scale organizations that we typically operate with. And as a result, just doing that traditional, here's 500 requirements, tell me what you can do type RFP selection just burns a lot of time and doesn't really actually help you get to an answer. So there are lots of other things, and Sian, I'm sure, will have loads of perspectives on this, having done a lot of these recently as well, that make a difference, right? And some of that is about really understanding that, right back to the value case, the why you're doing this, the strategy you're trying to achieve, the outcome, so that your vendors can talk to their experience in that space. They can bring to you examples of what they've done, so you can really understand how they've made others differentiate in the market using their technology. That's a really key part. I think how they work with you, the kind of team they can put on the ground, the kind of way that they engage with you commercially is really important. When things are close on functional points, commercial variations and commercial flexibility comes right to the fore in those discussions. And you're choosing a partner for multiple years. And that's the other big thing here, right? This is a service you're buying now. It's not a technology you're buying and you're managing yourself. It's a service you're buying. So this is a long-term partner that you need a strong service relationship with. And you need to feel that they are going to be adding value to you over the years of this contract and the agreement that you make. So you want to take your time with it. You want to do it well, but don't get drawn into just doing here's the 500 things to tick and sort those out.
Yeah, absolutely. Sian?
2 free swim passes.
No.
One. So I would take 1 free swim pass, and actually I'd be saying just get into a problem first mentality. And what we mean by that is exactly what you were just saying. It's about, let's think about the value that you're looking to actually get from the technology, and just use that as flipping from technology functional requirements into, right, okay, how will this technology help me deliver a business problem? So let's just take real examples that a lot of clients are going through. So acquisition. So if we look at a lot of situations, it's quite interesting how the technology providers show up differently on how their technology can support how you bring in a new acquisition, you merge it, how it is far easier to do. That's something that takes an awful lot of time in an awful lot of companies. So it's just really flipping from having, as you said, Aaron, long lists of requirements, firstly stepping back and thinking about maybe they're not requirements anymore, they're user stories. Let's think about making them specific to what's the role that needs what for what purpose, then putting weighting across those, because we all know that the vendors are really, really well developed now. So there's a lot of similarities, but equally they do things differently. So asking them how they actually show up to deliver a business problem, how they deliver to, for example, a particular experience angle of frontline workers, for example. So how do you deliver to a disconnected workforce? And or something that is more around how do you deliver very quickly to something that is needed from an additional set of functionality, different processes for different business units, how you change, because to Aaron's point, you can't change all policies, so you can't harmonize everything. So how do you set up some differences for different parts of the organization? So flip it from technology functional requirements into, right, this is what we need as a business.
I love that. And I love that kind of problem first kind of mentality. Sian, I'm going to stick with you for the step 4 then. So I've built my value case. I have got my plan in place. I have selected my tech. And the next thing that we talk about in terms of step 4 is that mobilization, because it's not just, and we talk about this in the paper, so we don't need to go into massive detail, but we talk about it's not just us as the incumbent that's buying the tech and then the tech provider, isn't it? There's a little bit more to it than that.
We think the dream team really is, of course, the client. And the client they're the only ones that know the depth of their own company, history, culture, pain points. So they absolutely bring a lot to the party. Of course, we're now at the stage where we've got our technology partner. So they bring the product, the roadmap, the collaboration communities and the customer success angle, by now we're actually looking for our SI. So we're looking for our technology system integration, system implementation partner. So what we need to do is think about, what do they bring? They bring really the knowledge and understanding of how do you configure the system, how do you deploy that and actually advantageously improve adoption. So they're looking at how have they done this before. They've got accelerators, but then also you do need to think about who's going to help from a pure keeping feet to the fire. And some of those things are done best by a strategic advisory partner like LACE, of course. So we see
shameless
ourselves
plug
as,
alert time.
yeah, a neutral party, but where we can help is some of that holistic mindset that brings a broader change perspective, broader operating model, and how do you land the solution in a little bit more of a broader way than some of the pure partners out there from a pure technology and SI perspective. So that four-way team, that dream team, we feel is really important that you actually think about all of those aspects as you mobilise.
Perfect. Aaron, just from your perspective, anything to add on to that one?
I think for me that I agree with everything Sian said. I think it's, and over the years, that combo of different parties works incredibly well. It might feel a bit unusual to have more parties in the mix than a couple, but it actually works really well. I guess for me, it's a couple of things from a client perspective, thinking through this element. One, don't underestimate how long it takes to free people up, right? So no matter what your ramp up plan is, you're going to go longer. So plan for that. That's one thing. The second is, and Sian mentioned this right at the start when we were talking about the value case and some of the numbers, that backfill element to this staffing and getting the right backfill and the timing and putting the right money aside to allow for people to be released so they're not doing it side of the desk. There's nothing, I think, more stressful than being on a project but not being on a project and trying to still do your day job, especially when it's a big system type based change. And then the last one, I guess, is with an eye to the future. When all the rest of the parties are gone and the rest of those organizations are a distant memory, you're going to be left holding a system. So what capability do you want to build? What's the gaps that you want to fill, and who do you want to fill it? And how do you want to build that into the operating model for HR for you?
Sian, you got something else you wanted to quickly nip in before we go into the step 5?
Just to really focus in on the SI. So this step, obviously, we've now got our technology partner choice. So this step really needs to be focused on who is your system implementation partner. And I think there are some lessons that we've learned over the years around the fit factors. So just literally in brief, it is a relatively long-term relationship you're actually forming. So over many years of implementation, and potentially they could be your application management services partner as well. So we do really think that it's worth spending the time to think about the strategic partnership fit. So do they understand your needs? Are they also focused on ROI? Have they got the right expertise? Are they really an extension of your client side team? So I think that's important. And then really the capability fit as well. So thinking about, do they have the right industry expertise? Because it is different. Every industry is different and has its nuances. And then do they have that ability to understand your outcomes and think about, how do we solution this specifically for you? Not necessarily making sure that it's customized as a solution, but thinking about what is right to meet your outcomes and how do they work with you. So just those sorts of factors are really important as you actually choose your SI as part of this mobilizing the team stage.
Yeah, I think this is really, really interesting for me personally. Obviously, before I joined LACE Partners, not seeing the detail that needs to go, the thinking that needs to go in beforehand, before any kind of tech selection process, but then also the getting those right relationships right, I think is quite interesting. And then we move, of course, on to step 5. So I'll start with you, Aaron, and then get Sian to just give any kind of thoughts. And this is the part in which, how do we actually make sure that we're going to make this work? Because there's no point in spending all of this money and getting this fantastic new whizzy system if no person is going to use it. So give me some thoughts here as to when we talk about this. Step 5 is ensuring change sticks. So give us some thoughts around what we think and how you make sure that you deliver on the importance of change and adoption.
We've done many a podcast over the years, Chris, on this topic alone, right? So we're going to do a very short, brief overview here. But although we're doing it short, don't underestimate how important it is. Right? Yeah. There's a lot of energy and effort to get to go live. The real hard work in an HR system launch is post go live, right? And that first annual cycle and making sure the changes you want around experience, the way people engage, the way they operate. Sian mentioned, disconnected workforces, frontline workforces. How are they engaging and utilizing it? These are all things that take careful planning and thinking, and you need to really understand behaviors. For people, it's not about training material. It's not about communicating, although that's a big part of it. That's not what's going to change the dial, right? This is about how do I talk to the people who are going to be using it in different ways, whether that's the professional users, the line managers, the employees, the leadership, right? How are they going to engage? Why do they want to engage? And how do I make that as sticky as possible, to use our change that sticks analogy? Very passionate around this space. There's lots that can be done here, and it really is understanding the what's in it for me focus point.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ed Sparks, who runs our change practice, will be delighted that we've repeatedly used the word change that sticks, because that's certainly a mantra that he uses. Sian, any kind of final sort of thoughts before we wrap up today on that kind of key part, as Aaron said? Like, we've only spent a little bit of time on it, but it's a really, really important part, isn't it?
Yes, and I think just taking your last point there, the what's in it for me, some of the little nuggets here really are just getting down to the level of how is this going to impact each of the different types of persona you've got? So stepping back, we've obviously already started with our employee experience view. So we've actually defined our personas. How is it that this change is going to impact them? And then making sure that things are specific to them, so that the change interventions are specific to them, the training, the comms is specific to them. So that would be something that we absolutely would advocate and we've learned from. Then also, another nugget would be around just making sure that you've spent enough time up front doing some of the listening and the insights that then feeds. Of course, it feeds your case for change right up front. So we are saying change that sticks as step 5, but we've been thinking about change all the way through. Yeah. So doing those surveys, that data-driven aspect of informing the value case, and then keeping that going through defining the personas, and then just making sure that things are tailored and measured. So last nugget would be scorecards, adoption scorecards. We've got to be focused on what does good look like as an outcome from an adoption perspective, and you've got to be able to baseline it and measure it. So just keep measuring, and then that keeps everyone focused post go live.
That's absolutely brilliant. So that's the quick whistle. That's a real quick whistle-stop tour. There's a lot of information in the Less Stress HRIS Part 1 paper that we've put together. At the time of recording this, it's not quite out yet, but it will be out by the time you lovely listeners are listening to it. So just to reiterate, those are the 5 steps themselves. It's building your value case. It's building your plan and design foundations. It's selecting your tech partner, mobilizing your team and ways of working, and then ensuring change that sticks. Sian, thank you very much for being part of the show today, and you are definitely coming on again. I will drag you kicking and screaming.
But I'll be much taller by then, so it'll be much harder to drag me.
Yes, it'll be a lot more difficult to get Aaron on, because he'll be too busy tending to his tiny planet that he's got in his pocket. Aaron, thank you very much for joining us.
And my giant seahorse, Chris.
Don't forget the giant seahorse. And you've also snuck in a swimming pool in there as well. Don't think I didn't notice that as well. Ladies and gentlemen, for listening in, thank you very much. Hopefully you've enjoyed that. And please feel free to download the white paper. It's on the Lace Partners website. If you go to lacepartners.co.uk/insights, there's a little tab in the insights section. You click on white paper. You can see all of our thought leadership that we've produced over the last few years. Some really, really good stuff in there, if we do say so ourselves. But from myself, from Sian, and from Aaron, thank you very much for listening, and hopefully we'll speak to you next time on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye bye.